We have two speakers. Unfortunately, Emily Askew and Kaia Rønsdal are not here today. So I'm going to keep the introductions very short. We're beginning with Valerie Maison. Valerie is a doctoral fellow at the Max Weber Center at the University of New York. And she is interested in the study of immigrant trajectories and their descent. She has worked on some wonderful documentaries. We had Valerie present one of her documentaries, Quel côté de l'absence, which she has made in 2018 with Federica. I would highly recommend it. She presented that for one of our earlier events. So I'll hand it over to Valerie.
I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to take part in this conference and to apologize in advance for my English because I don't speak very well English and I don't have time to prepare slides. I'm sorry again. In this presentation, I want to look at different aspects to the returns of the deceased in the case of immigrants of Maghrebi origin and their descendants. My remarks are based on my doctoral research on the issue around burial in migratory context in Chalon-sur-Saône, in Burgundy, and on a current research in Lyon on the repercussions of the travel restrictions introduced at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, repercussions on the choice of burial site. Using some of the results from Chalon study, I will first clarify the framework that governs decision-making about place of burial. Then I will talk in more detail about repatriation of the remains, looking at what motivated this choice and what effect it has on the different group to which the deceased belonged. The case of Chalon. My results, based on an ethnographic survey which combine documentary research, participative observations, and interviews. 95 interviews, is to say 45 with local authorities officer, funeral undertakers, corpse washers, imams, and 50 biographical interviews. And lastly, during my thesis, I worked with the photographer Frédéric Leclou to produce an ethnographic documentary film entitled Quel côté de l'absence, on which side of absence. This ethnographic approach gives us three different sets of people: professional and religious actors, individuals, and spectators of the film during the debates that follow the screenings. Migration, death, and burial is envisaged as a complex triptych. Immigrant families in Chalon-sur-Saône are clearly well settled for a long time, and the cemetery has a Muslim section. However, posthumous repatriation remains the norm, even for the younger generation who were born in France. Repatriation is usually organized by insurance company in a framework governed by country of origin via networks consular service, who are more and more frequently working with Muslim funeral homes. Although individual aspiration respond to a set of personal reflection linked to biography, representation, transnational family interaction, age, family status, etc. However, will that concern intimity and personal experience, funerary rituals cannot be dissociated from the need to belong to the social group. Even individual subjectivity doesn't indicate a total absence of social control. Choices are arbitrated in a context of contradictory social norms that influence expected behavior. They are principally the prevalence of posthumous repatriation, established since the early days of Maghrebi immigration as a norm, relations prescription, transnational family interaction and attachment to the family's country of origin, local burial as a scene of integration being the dominant discourse concerning citizenships of immigrants and their descendants, and social political context and public discourse on ethnic and religious minorities. And on this last point, the distribution of the film allowed areas of social tension to be voiced. In a context in which Islam and immigration have become recurrent, not to say obsessive, topics of debate, the public screenings draw attention to the minority dimension. This notion of minority places people concerned in a form of political domination. And today, simplistic arguments continue to reveal a lack of awareness about the funerary rituals of immigrants from Muslim countries, illustrated by the shortage of Muslim sections in French cemeteries, for example. Returning the body of the dead. When a death occurs, the organization of the funeral and burial pose a double challenge: how to act within the constraining context and how to reconcile the belongings without a rupture or prioritization of one over another. The choice of burial site is very often the first decision that transnational families must make. It means, first, designating in which country there will an absence of burial site, and next, adapting the funerary rituals. In the Islamic faith, death is a major rite of passage. The Islamic ritual remains the norm, and references to religious values, whether to reject or to emphasize them, are recurrent in the interviews. Moreover, the way religions practice are interpreted and adopted may vary from one person to another. We can distinguish three models of funeral: disruption, burial outside the Muslim section, or cremation. It's exceptional because it is a religious taboo. This choice is motivated by a desire for emancipation from the norms, and it concerns very few people. Compromise, burial in the Muslim section in the city's cemetery. This remains a minority choice, although it's becoming more admissible today. The confessional section is presented as a place of compromise. It can help maintain balance and create family for mixed ethnic couples and those affected by divorce. This choice makes it easier for surviving family members to visit the grave. This new territorial attachment is negotiated within the family group, but is also influenced by issues around citizenship, recognition of immigration in the collective memory, and normalization of religious affiliation. Repatriation of the remains. In Chalon-sur-Saône, this is the option chosen in the majority of cases, 80%, despite the fact that the cemetery had had a Muslim section since 1995. Repatriation of the body is more and more frequently organized through a system of burial insurance and within a framework governed by the state of origin. The Tunisian states bear the costs of posthumous repatriation of Tunisian citizens from abroad. Moroccan banks have developed a broad offering of repatriation insurance and actively market both individual and family contracts to Moroccan living abroad. The option for Algerian nationals and their descendants are different again. Some contribute to the Amicale des Algériens, an association linked to the Algerian state, other to village mutual aid funds, while other takes out insurance with companies such as AG2R or La Banque Postale. So why does the return of the dead still have so much meaning? What does this return mean for descendants born in France? In my view, being repatriated for burial is not an alternative between integration into the host society or choice of the country of origin. Rather, it should be seen as an attempt to maintain continuity between the descendants in the host country and the family's countries of origin, or repatriation in the case of descendants who were born in France. Moving on the question of materiality, the materiality of the corpse is important in that symbolically repairs the disorder produced first by migration and then by death. The ritual washing of the body by corpse washer and family members, and the care taken in the preparation for burial are the first steps in a grieving process. In traditional families, a part of the members can't be present to funeral ritual of separation. If, moreover, the body is not repatriated, the deceased person is maintained in his status of absent. Is to say, repatriation of the body can inverse the experience of absence. Some people, especially among the younger people interviewed, also mentioned the importance of religious recommendations. Being buried in a Muslim country is seen as an act of piety and a blessing. Although the religious corpus doesn't impose requirement as to burial site, it does make recommendation regarding the grave itself and accords a sacred value to all the elements relating to the tomb and the body. This is the notion of good neighborly relations. which is essential in Islam for the living as for the dead. Lastly, the choice of repatriation is also determined by personal motivation linked to each person's individual experience. There is no time to go into more detail on this aspect here. So in 2020, the travel restriction introduced in the context of the pandemic had a major impact on repatriation of body between Europe and North Africa. The restriction made repatriation impossible. In France, in the face of a lack or a saturation of Muslim section in municipal cemeteries, numerous families found themselves in situations that were not only tragic, but also discriminatory. But at the same time, in some areas where solutions were found according to Islamic rites, the funeral homes, at the family request, proposed a temporary solution wherever possible. This could be holding the body in the funeral home, or in a temporary vault, or temporary interment of the body with a view to exhumation and repatriation. Transport to Tunisia and Algeria soon became possible once again. Also, the conditions were not ideal. The Kingdom of Morocco, however, kept its borders closed for several months. In Lyon area, Algerian and Moroccan families have been able to exhume and repatriate bodies, but in Chalon-sur-Saône, the families were unable to benefit from temporary vaults, and the body were interred in the earth in the Muslim section, which makes exhumation more complicated. So, if it's not easy for families to call into question the repatriation, today they are discussing it more frequently, especially Moroccan families in Chalon. In conclusion, in my presentation, repatriation is envisaged as a social practice that restructures the relationship between members of transnational family groups or communities, create and encourage in the country of origin, and maintains the link between citizens and nation states. During the pandemic, however, with the risk of contamination, the bodies of immigrants and their descendants were seen undesirable by the states of origin. The closing of borders revealed the limitation of the measure established by certain governments to maintain links with their citizens living abroad. And in parallel, these exceptional constraints confirmed that in France, the cemetery doesn't reflect the nation, that there is not necessarily a place there for all citizens to be buried in accordance with their religion's beliefs. It has also brought to light the contradictions and socio-political issues around funerary rituals in the migratory context, above all in the case of religious minorities. if we pay attention to development in Chalon-sur-Saône, we will indeed appear that the different constraints on funeral shows experienced during this period have renewed the perception of symbolics in relation to repatriation of the dead. If this proves to be the case in wider geographical context, then it will represent a real challenge for the public authorities in terms of inclusivity in the years to come, and perhaps will call for a fresh examination of repatriation as a transnational social practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker today is Federica Mazzara. Federica is a reader in cultural studies at the University of Westminster, London, and her book, Reframing Migration, Lampedusa, Borders, Spectacle and Aesthetics of Subversion, was published by Peter Lang in 2019. Federica is also the curator of a very powerful exhibition, Sync Without Trace. And her talk today is titled Objects of Hope and of Hopes and Death, the Semiotics of the Life Jacket in Context of Migration from Mainstream Media to Art and Activism.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the organizer. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I hope I can keep you away because I know you're exhausted. We all are. And I think it's a bit unfair to be at the end of the day, you know. But thanks for your attention. So yes, this is a paper about life jackets. I've been interested in debris waste. I've been talking about this in my book as well. And of course, I have included wasted objects in the exhibition Sync Without Trace, which was focusing on death at sea specifically. So that's what it is. It's the journey of the life jacket and how it has evolved as a sign. Because we know that the necropolitics of migration that of course has led many people around the world to rely on unauthorized routes has produced a large quantity of waste, of debris, which inevitably carry a meaning that goes beyond its mere opposition to utility. Debris generated by and at violent borders usually consist of personal domestic items, clothing, which somehow testify to a humble attempt to keep one's life decent, even in the horrific conditions that many migrants endure on their unauthorized journeys. I have some images here. This is a picture from the US-Mexico border. And it's part of a project that led to an exhibition as well in the States. And you can see part, of course, of the route of a Mexican crossing and leaving behind pieces of clothing, bags. As part of the exhibition, there was this wall of bags collected at the border. Another image comes from Lampedusa, and this is Porto M, which is a museum, actually an anti-museum, as the activists prefer to define it. And these are objects that have been collected over the past 20 years, at least, by the collective called Askew, which is the local collective in Lampedusa. They started in 2005 when they bumped into some objects in the cemetery of boats, known, which was in the landfill of the island, and now it's not existing anymore. And it is, of course, a very, very powerful and of course, contradictory space as well. But the activists started finding objects. It was especially Giacomo Sferlazzo, who is the leader of the Askew Association, they started finding objects, personal items, and then they decided to collect them. Then they stored them in their houses because they didn't have a space. And then when they finally managed to rent a space, they decided to display them. There's plenty to say about this. I don't have time in the context of this paper, but maybe during the discussion. So today I'm going to focus on another wasted object that has particularly marked the movement of migrants from Turkey to Greece during what was considered and has been labeled, especially mainstream discourse, as the migrant crisis, refugee crisis of 2015. And I'm always very resistant to this definition because, of course, first of all, it's not a crisis, but also all this crisis talking that starts from in 2015 is nonsensical, considering that, of course, these we've been witnessing. I'm from Sicily, and I remember already late 80s, beginning of 90s, watching news lunchtime around, these issues. So there's nothing recent really about this so-called refugee crisis. So I'm here talking about the life jacket, and this is a kind of iconic image. Is from Lesbos, the mountain of life jackets, again defined as the cemetery of life jackets. And of course, it is impossible not to create a link between these objects and the humans generating this waste. Now, waste in context of migration becomes inevitably a powerful metaphor for the production of what Zygmunt Bauman defines the wasted humans. And he makes an excellent point, of course. He says production of wasted humans on an industrial scale is an eminently modern phenomenon, as it is the concept of waste itself and its opposition, the concept of utility. In the peasant economy, which was dominant in the pre-modern era, there was no room for the idea of waste and the associated practices of its production and removal and destruction. No room for litter, no room for refuse, garbage or rubbish, because everything had its utility to be used and reused. And this is, I think, a crucial point, and that's pretty much what will frame my paper, because it's within this framework of reusing and upcycling that I want to present the journey of the life jacket in context of migration through activism and art. Because in context of migration, the life jacket has indeed become a very liminal object, an object in between hope and death, an object that starts from a functional meaning, which is, of course, to save lives, has very positive connotation. Even the term life jackets, of course, suggests that is an object we should trust because it saves our lives. From a functional meaning into, of course, a symbolic and structural meaning. Which has also very, very dark connotation and is associated especially to the unauthorized sea crossing, especially around Turkey, Greece. Images like these have become familiar through a mass mediatic narrative that is associating the unauthorized journey via sea to issues such as desperation, multitude, death, crisis, environmental damage, etc., etc. Very much in line with the border spectacle that, of course, Nicolas de Genova talks about. Unfortunately, life jackets have also generated a gruesome business. So the city of Izmir on Turkey's Mediterranean coast has long been known as a tourist destination, a bit like Lampedusa, and of course, in the context of the Sicilian Channel and the sea crossing the Mediterranean, but especially asylum seekers from Syria have been using it as a staging post on their journey to Europe, providing shopkeepers with an unmissable business opportunity. So you can see here, one shop is turned, was meant to sell men's clothing, turned into a place that is selling life jackets to desperate Syrians. So life jacket as a commodity, and of course it's not only Syrians, mainly Syrians, I should say. So life jacket as a commodity. In 2016, you might know, Turkish authorities seized more than 1,200 fake life jackets in Izmir. They were made of a material that doesn't really float, but actually becomes heavy when soaked and pretty much causes the death of whoever is wearing it. Consider that a properly made life jacket costs around $150, and these are sold for $15 only. So it's clear, the liminality of this object is very, very clear, from an object of hope into an object of death. Life jackets have been used recently, especially around the 2015, 16, 17, as a tool of commemoration. So we have had, for instance, displayed like this. This is in 2016, the so-called Graveyard of Life Jackets, which was a display of 2,500 life jackets right outside the Parliament Square, organized by the International Rescue Committee and World Vision. A display that was, the main purpose was to raise awareness. And another one is here in Lesbos, where you can see the symbol of the peace symbol made of life jackets. There are several more. I haven't brought them. There's no time. But what I want to focus today is on this idea of actually upcycling the symbolic, as I like to define it, which is when the life jacket had been used by activists, by artists, to reflect critically on this concept of human waste and to subvert somehow the trash talk that characterize the public discourses about people on the move. One of the most interesting initiatives comes from Lesbos. This is an organization, a bit like Askew and Lampedusa, Lesbos Solidarity, which was born in 2015 in the Peak camp. And the activists like to define these as a place of active solidarity. And it really seems like an excellent hub, you know, where migrants are involved in all sorts of initiatives. There's a great sense of belonging, community. And of course, these are people who are on the waiting list, like they are waiting. So there's this sense of immobility that is filled with this sort of sense of becoming useful because they are involved in all sorts of workshops. They are called upcycling workshops. And they are all informed by this sense of justice, solidarity, doing things together. And one of them is, one of the initiatives is called Safe Passage Bags, which as a purpose, well done, I noticed that, there is one here, is to turn life jackets into accessories, mostly bags and other objects. What is of course interesting is the fact that the migrants sell these bags and they make a small living out of this. They have an interesting web page, an interesting Facebook page, a very, very active, and I think you should really take a look and engage with this initiative. And then of course, there's the artistic response, and we probably all know that the renowned Chinese dissident and artist Ai Weiwei has engaged quite extensively and quite a lot with life jackets. He has been in the spotlight for addressing on several occasions the so-called refugee crisis. And he has strongly condemned the current mismanagement of the migration flows, being of course himself been an exile. And he has especially addressed the whole issue of Syrians and sea crossing between Turkey and Greece. He has even opened a studio in Lesbos in 2016, where he carried out a series of art projects designed to raise awareness. And some of them have received some criticism, including mine, but also, of course, lots of acclaim. But I mean, I try to explain the kind of criticism that I would like to raise in relation, especially to one initiative. Is of course also he made a documentary on flow, and there is a paper tomorrow around this. Looking forward to hearing about that, and I hope there will be more discussion around this. One of Ai Weiwei's first installation that speaks of the unauthorized journeys of mainly Syrians who crossed the channel between Turkey and Greece was an installation in Berlin in 2016, consisting of the recycling of 14,000 life jackets abandoned again on the shore of the Greek island of Lesbos. So what Ai Weiwei did was to use these 14,000 life jackets to wrap the 6 columns of the Berlin 19th century concert house patio during the 60s Berliner International Film Festival. Ai Weiwei called the installation Safe Passage, and it also included a long, I don't know if you can see, but there is a long black dinghy, which again was rescued from the landfill in Lesbos, which is posed vertically in the middle between the column. So the installation is undoubtedly impressive in its way of illustrating the scale of the loss at sea. Although we could argue that, of course, given the scale of these artworks, these monumental installations somehow end up reinforcing the spectacle of statistics, which is very much in line with governmental discourse. So in this case, at least that's how I see it, debris seems to remain merely ornamental. It does not really entail a subversion of the narrative of crisis and emergency. But there is one aspect about this installation that many people found quite disturbing. And this was the fact that this temporary installation coincided with the Cinema for Peace Gala, which took place on the 15th of February 2016 inside the concert house. And that evening, Ai Weiwei was the honorary president of the year's jury. And the gala evening included a performance that was, this was an idea of Ai Weiwei, which implied that the guests were asked to take out under the chair a package which had an isothermal blanket inside, you know, those yellow, golden, silver blankets that I normally use to wrap migrants immediately after their rescue. So, and he asked all the guests to unwrap it and wear it. So guests, including Hollywood celebrities, were asked to wear it. And the guests started posing for inappropriate photographs that were later posted on social media, showing them wrapped in this golden and silver blanket while smiling at the camera. Now, I don't have to really say much about this. I guess you all share my sense of, you know. So this highly problematic performance reflects very much a change in the communication strategy of humanitarianism. And I'm sorry Jefferson is not here because I would have loved to hear his view on this. Humanitarianism and solidarity that, according to Lili Choliaraki, goes from an ethics of pity to an ethics of irony. In this role played by celebrities in acts of solidarity, Choliaraki refers to the performativity of celebrity humanitarianism that entails a narcissistic self-reflection. And unfortunately, Ai Weiwei reiterated this when he posed as the Alan Kurdi child on the shore of Lesbos. So in line with that. He also did several other installations with life jackets. The first one on the left is in Copenhagen. The second one is in Vienna. Don't have time to engage with all of them, but I want to show you two more projects. This is by an Angolan Portuguese artist, Pedro Pires, was used 140 life jackets to build skull. I just found this interesting because in a way, like the symbol of the symbolic somehow, yes. But the one I want to present to you is this very, very young artist called Achilles, 16 years old, who again went to Lesbos and decided to do something with this discarded life jackets. And what he did was to assemble igloos, a series of them, and he ended up, being on display at several exhibitions, including the Moroso in Milan. The exhibition was called SOS, Save Our Souls, and this resulting waterproof structure was intended as both a shelter and a welcome point for arriving migrants. What I find interesting about this is not necessarily the igloo, which is, I think, a clever idea, but it's all the pictures that he displayed as a company material to this, which are these pictures. They're all photoshopped and they pretty much locate this igloo into different contexts. So we have like at the shore, like as I said, a welcoming shelter. I find very interesting, he located one on inside a dinghy or inside refugee camps, etc., etc. So these kind of Photoshop pictures are an attempt to repurpose the wasted object into a place of solace and safety. So we might think of the life jacket in projects such as the Lesbos Solidarity or the Soros project as disobedient objects. This is a term that I borrow from Catherine Flood and Gavin Grindon, who have organized this amazing exhibition in the London Victoria and Albert Museum 2014. And this is what they say about this definition of disobedient objects. They say these objects are full of uncertainty and the empowering and terrifying idea that our own actions and inactions could make a difference. We might think of these as activist objects in the sense that they are active, bound up with the agency of social change. They embody uncomfortable truths about the present and destabilize the official line of politician and media organization. So through recycling, this initiative of upcycling the life jacket create a rupture with the hegemonic narrative of discardable humans. The recycling as the function to transform objects of trash into objects of social and cultural value, generating different connection, at least, between subjects and objects, and acknowledging that these objects are a testimony of a human passage that the hegemonic discourse wants to erase. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the floor is open for questions. Judith, and then.
Thank you for another great panel. I have just a very quick and small question for you, Federica. You emphasized the life